Good morning and welcome to the Caron Chapel service on November 15th, 2020. It's exciting for me to be able to share with the patients that we have in the auditorium and with those of you who are watching on live stream and with those of you who are watching on camera on the YouTube channel. So really cool to have you all listening in. Thank you. There is a theme for this morning, and I was just sharing with the audience that I will offer a single word, rescue, as the theme, because I think that's a gentle, friendly word, but I want to share with you that the other words I thought about using to title the theme today often trigger people and are loaded. So I could have called the theme for today salvation. I could have called it exorcism. I could have called it cultic persuasion, religious fanaticism, and I'm happy to see my audience is not fleeing, but I will share with you that those were my initial reactions when I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a particular weekend when my sponsor wanted me to go to a retreat, and the woman who was facilitating the retreat, Sister Ann, said that the theme for the weekend was, she said there were three words, but I can't remember to this day the other two, but I know one of them was conversion. And I was like, whoa, I need to leave now. Because I was, as many of you know, I began my recovery as a sort of solidly committed atheist. And I was really, really reluctant to be forced or persuaded into a kind of religiosity that I associated with my experience as a young man of Hare Krishnas in the Port Authority building in New York City in their saffron robes, trying to get me to read the Bhagavad Gita. But notice I'm standing here in a white robe with colors. So apparently there's a conversion story that did happen. And I bring some testimony to it. I want to start also with some empathy. If this is irrelevant for you and you're a deeply faithful and religious person who has the saffron robes of whatever your tradition is, great, that's awesome. If you are devoutly and rigidly and confirmed in your soul as a person who will not subscribe to a religious movement or tradition, that's totally cool. And by the way, you can get and stay clean and sober successfully with that as your trajectory. And you can actually be quite spiritual without being formally religious. But I want to ask you, if you just stay with me, don't run away, let's explore a little bit the sensitivity around these loaded words and this deep idea. And in a very Bill Wilson, founder of Alcoholics Anonymous kind of way, the next move in my message for this morning is to ask you to think about your own brokenness and whether the scorn and scandal that people in our situation, meaning folks who are in early recovery, we point at the religious fanatic and we go, gosh, they're all screwed up. But maybe we should look at ourselves, like respectfully to the audience, you're all, those of you who are here in the room, like you're institutionalized. And that suggests things are not going super well. I'm not a big Dr. Phil fan, but how's that working for you is a mean question to ask a Caron patient. So, and Bill Wilson does point this out at one point, I think it's in the chapter The Agnostics, where he says it's interesting that we, whose lives were quite disrupted, look at religious figures with scorn and scandal when perhaps they have something to say to us. So, what are the hallmarks of the brokenness of a Caron patient or a newcomer to a Dharma recovery meeting, or a person who ends up at Smart Recovery, or a person who goes to harm reduction trajectory with an opioid disorder? Like, what are the hallmarks of that brokenness? And there's several. One of them is that their relational network is compromised. So who they're hanging out with and who's supporting them is dwindling and usually frustrated and angry and not necessarily the best company. So there's a loneliness of the substance use disorder journey that you might very well, like, I'm not trying to be mean this morning, but I think it's important to lift up where you are and the pain of it. The other thing is there's the whole physiology of addictive disorders and what you're doing to your economic and physiological life. Like usually the money situation isn't great and the liver toxicity thing isn't usually great, or like, whatever. Whatever your particular chemical was, the crystal meth person with the teeth problems, or the crystal meth sex addicted person with the complications of promiscuity in a sexually risky behavior environment, and other kinds of illness. There's a sense of a predicament that goes with being an addict and getting admitted to residential treatment. And there is often a desire on the part of the patient and even the family to think, oh, my family member or I am not that bad. It's just a little thing. I just need to figure out how I'm going to do this slightly differently. When I would rather suggest, no, it's quite a big thing. If you're here and your insurance company is paying for part or all of your treatment, that's because there's an assessment that was made of medical necessity. And there is an urgency. I just did a workshop with my denomination, which is the United Church of Christ, yesterday, and it's a mental health network that seeks to help congregations reach out to people in various forms of mental struggle. And unfortunately, in churches, often what happens is that we hide. We go in and we wear our nice clothes and we're like, oh, I think I'm fine. And then you find out later that somebody in the congregation committed suicide, and it's like, well, gosh, we didn't even know Joe was having a problem. So let's be honest with each other if we can, and acknowledge that we don't arrive at Caron because everything's fine. I was struck a little bit by a very new conversation in the political landscape on this particular weekend, just because of Kamala Harris's entrance into the spotlight. Suddenly, those of you who watch the news are learning about Diwali, and I'm guessing many of you don't know about Diwali. But one of the things that was bothering me early in the week when people were talking about Diwali is they were calling it an Indian holiday. Well, it's not an Indian holiday, it's a Hindu festival. And India has a very strong Hindu population, so yes, it is the country of India that probably has the largest Diwali celebrations. But anyway, it's a religious observance, often translated as the Festival of Light. It's an exuberant and dramatic festival celebration. And the reason I start with that is because it's kind of new and on the radar for me. I did a little study about the backstory of Diwali, and like many festivals and many religious traditions, there are different folks who ascribe different stories to the Diwali observance. But I want to cluster Diwali in with, let me say, Ramadan in Islam, with Passover and Yom Kippur in Judaism, with Christmas and Easter in Christianity, and with Yule in pagan traditions. And I want to suggest to you that in the wisdom traditions of the world, of antiquity and of today, I'm guessing you could pick one, Baha'i, or that I didn't mention, or Buddhism. For sure, Buddhism would have such a thing. You have holidays and stories about rescue, about coming out of shadow and into sunlight, about brokenness that becomes repaired or integrated. The Japanese idea of a piece of pottery that is broken and then beautifully glued back together with gold fabrics that is more valuable than the pottery was originally. And there is, I never like to make claims of universality, but I think I stand on pretty good ground with Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell in suggesting that in every culture and every time around the world, the human communities have generated heroic narratives of people coming out of brokenness and reintegrating their brokenness into like, I'm better after this horrible thing kind of stories that are rescue stories. And we love these stories. We like, and if you think about whether it's Frozen or Moana or like what our kids watch, or The Wizard of Oz, or The Lord of the Rings, or Indiana Jones, or like all of these stories are essentially have at least within them the dynamics of plot change and of redemption and of transformation. And when I was 16 years old and I was running away from the Hare Krishna guy in the Port Authority and freaked out and had to tell my parents that I was like almost ready, like he wanted my money and he wanted me to come with him. And that set in place in my mind a certain fear of being incorporated into some movement that was going to, like take away my autonomy. It never occurred to me as I progressed further in my life that I was lost and empty and isolated and broken and that I needed rescue. And that these probably well-meaning dude in the Port Authority, or perhaps not, I don't know, he might have been a really sick fellow, but that not all people who pursue such efforts are horrendous people. And that not all movements that invite others on journeys of transformation are horrible movements. And some people say to me, well, it's a cult. I'm like, yeah, it sort of is. So, but $1 in a basket, which is where I started with my contributions to Alcoholics Anonymous, is a pretty nice economic level of commitment. And the best people in my life have been in my sober life until I finally remarried, and now I have an intact family system that's really helping and supporting me, so I put them first in my list today. But from the time I was 28 until the time I was in my 40s, probably, really the community that manifested the greatest solidarity and constancy for me was not really my family of origin, no disrespect if my brothers and sister are watching, but it was my recovery family. And so, 2 more points. One is, there's a lot of Caron patients who don't want to hear anything about wisdom traditions and sacred movements and cultic crap, but who are very, very interested in hearing Dr. Wang or Dr. Drosnes do the Monday morning addiction medicine lecture because they want the science of it. But in that Monday morning lecture, they hear about Dr. Nora Volkow, who is an extraordinary researcher who has influenced addiction medicine understanding in this country and around the world. She's been on this campus. She's got a great personal story herself, and she's done these brain studies, which maybe you've learned about. And her predominant way of trying to teach a lay population about what her advanced neuroscience research teaches is to use the term the hijacked brain. So she describes you, those of you in the room, and those of you who are watching here, but who are watching in recovery or your family or whatever, and she describes the essence of the neurological issue as a hijacking, where the frontal cortex, the decision-making apparatus of the brain, becomes, here the AA language, powerless, actually, to override the more mammalian impulse action cycle. So you have craving, and the next thing you know, you're using, and it's almost as if you were kind of dissociated. Like you don't. I remember watching myself pouring the scotch, and thinking, danger, Will Robinson, like don't do it. And yet I could not intercept that movement from impulse to action because my brain had been hijacked by my use disorder. Well, when a plane is hijacked, it needs a dramatic intervention, right? And I remember when I was growing up and planes were hijacked, like they would either send in SWAT teams or they would, try to negotiate, and then the negotiations would fail, and sometimes people would die, and there's a horrible eventuality. So I'm looking around at you in the audience, and I want to say, wow, your brain has been hijacked. And it merits rescue. It merits desperate effort. And there might be significant negative consequences of us getting you out of your hijacked situation. And the essence of what I hoped would come from the message this morning is for us in thinking about these deep and meaningful challenges is for us to acknowledge that we are standing where we are today, wherever you are, I'm standing wherever I am. And to the degree that you suffer from a hijacked condition, you would scream, I need help. Like you would understand that that doesn't mean you're more broken than the next person, or that you've got no one here has invented a new way of being broken. You except in the sense of the uniqueness of each person's story, but it's okay to need help, and it's terrible to need help and not ask for it. And it's tragic to need help and then not accept it. So you're in a place here that can exercise your demons, can rescue you from your broken situation, can restore the neural pathways of your brain. And it's not a magic wand. I can't go up to this young fellow here and just poof, fix him instantaneously. It's a journey. It's a heroic journey. It's a profound effort. But it actually happens all the time. It works. And in my tradition, where this sermon would take us is to an altar call. I need to ask you, are you in? Do you want to get well? And that's the big question here. Or are you married to your misery? And I don't mean to make addiction a blame thing. I don't think that's it. But honestly, if you won't cooperate with the journey out of the woods, you become complicit in a very subtly intricate, complicated way. You have help right at your hands. Worth throwing the life ring. When I went to seminary, I'll shut up in a minute. When I went to seminary, I was still very, very hesitant about all of these matters, but I went out of spiritual curiosity, and because AA had rescued me. And I was like, wow, how did you all do that? Because I was broken and lost. And they're like, it's a God thing. And I'm like, it's a what thing? And they're like, no, it's pretty much a God thing. And so I found myself in this New Testament class with Caron, this brilliant New Testament scholar, radical, progressive, feminist thinker about the Christian writings. And she taught me that the word that they translate in the New Testament writings and the Christian writings as salvation also means rescue or healing. And that was really helpful for me, because you would use it for a sick person getting well, or for a trapped person getting free, or for a blind person restoring their sight, or for an oppressed person to be put at liberty. The same word. So it's all hung up on the saffron robes of my 16-year-old experience. But I came to be able to accept help through Alcoholics Anonymous, and then through this sacred movement in which I stand before you this morning. But I am not selling that. I'm encouraging you towards a supportive journey of recovery and of spirituality that you would choose and that you feel comfortable with. And if that's so, today I'm sort of excited because we have people who are not necessarily representing those traditions, but we're going to have a Jewish healing prayer, we're going to have a Buddhist healing prayer, we're going to have a Hindu prayer for peace, and we're going to have a Christian reading about this liberation and freedom that is possible. So, and if it's atheism and AA, that's great. Go that way. Pick or atheism and smart recovery, or Dharma recovery. There's a menu of options, and there's help for us. Thank goodness. Let's get